Do you think that people can change their old habits and behaviors? Do you want to improve yourself, but you don't know what exactly you need to improve on? Being aware of your own thoughts, behaviors, and feelings would need MindSight. MindSight is a mental activity that helps you take note of your own mistakes and bad habits. It's a tool that can help you become a better you. Hello everyone, my name is Mohita and I am a giggler, which means I will be narrating the summary of MindSight, the new science of personal transformation, by Daniel J. Siegel, MD. In this book, you'll learn of situations in which MindSight is lacking. You'd be surprised just how easily our emotions can control us. You'll learn about the importance of reflecting upon your actions using openness, objectivity, and observation. You'll also learn about how a way of thinking, such as MindSight, can change your brain. Are you ready to know yourself more? Diving into the sea inside. Would you be surprised if I told you that each one of us is living in two worlds? We live in an external world and an internal world. The external world is where you interact with other people. This is where you do everything earth-related, so to speak. The internal world is the world inside you. It consists of every thought, aspiration, idea, and feeling that you had. Unfortunately, the world inside you has bad parts as well. Every regret, failure, and fear are just lurking in the shadows, waiting to overwhelm you. How do you cope when the bad parts threaten to drown you in their misery? Bad thoughts might temporarily go away, but what happens when they never leave your side? This is where the transformational tool called MindSight comes in handy. Developing your MindSight can help you gain control of your own mind. It will help you get out of your own overthinking and help you face problems in a much healthier way. Daniel Siegel defines MindSight as a way of becoming aware of how we think. It helps us analyze how we react and behave in certain situations. Aside from becoming aware, MindSight will help us in changing our not-so-good reactions and behaviors. We don't always act like our best selves, so MindSight can help us get over this. Although we want to change ourselves for the better, it can be hard to do so. Where would we start? MindSight can be the stepping stone in this journey. What's more, the effects of having MindSight can be seen in the physical structure of our brains. The way we think is powerful. Most importantly, MindSight can help us improve our lives. It can do wonders for our well-being. Creps of wrath. MindSight lost and found. One day, Daniel Siegel, his 9-year-old daughter, and 13-year-old son were taking a casual stroll. During their walk, they happened to pass by a crepe shop. They all went inside since the son was hungry and he wanted some crepes. As his order was placed in front of him, the author's son eagerly took a huge bite off of it. It smelled delicious and it looked delicious as well. Seeing the brother eat the delicious crepe made his sister want to eat it too. She said that she wanted only a small bite because she was curious as to how it tasted. Buying one crepe for her, as her brother suggested, was reasonable. But the author's daughter refused. She said she just wanted a small bite. A heated argument would have been avoided if the author, Dan, had just gone ahead and bought a crepe for his daughter. But instead, he messed up. Dan took his daughter's side and insisted that his son should share. Besides, she only wanted a small piece of it. Dan's son sighed and obeyed his dad. He cut the smallest piece he could manage and offered it to his sister. His sister complained that it was too small and she wanted a bigger one. If your head is beginning to ache at this point, so was Dan's. He could feel himself getting furious by the minute. Dealing with kids can be so exhausting. So Dan once again urged his son to cut a larger piece for his sister. His son did this without complaining, and Dad breathed a sigh of relief. But his daughter still wasn't satisfied. She pointed out that the big piece her brother gave her was all burnt up. She wouldn't be able to taste the crepe at all. Dan had enough. Waves of anger rolled over him, and he couldn't deal with it any longer. He stood up and took his daughter's hand. They went outside of the crepe shop and waited for the son to finish his crepe. When he was done, they went inside their car and went home. The son asked why he left the shop. Dan angrily told him that he should know how to share. The son calmly told his irrational father that he did share the crepe with his sister. His son was actually right, but by that point, Dan wasn't listening. The author was too caught up in his own emotions. Dan knew he was being irrational. His son was right as well. But for the author to deal with this, he needed to calm down. So Dan and his daughter went out of the house and went roller skating. The activity gradually made him release the tension he had been feeling earlier. Dan could feel his anger draining away. The daughter broke the silence after a while. She asked her father why he was so angry at his son. Dan made a lame excuse that he was trying to teach them that sharing was important, but he knew it was more than that. As Dan thought about it some more, he suddenly remembered his relationship with his older brother. Although they were close when they were still young, their relationship changed when his older brother became a teenager. They always fought. It was through this experience that Dan made a goal for his older self. If he ever had kids, he would make sure that they got along. Dan told this to his daughter, and her response was a wise one. She said that her father's issues with his sibling were very different from her issue with her brother. She said that her father shouldn't solve his own sibling issue through them. Dan knew that his daughter was right. By then he was calm enough to accept this fact, and he was ready to talk with his son. MindSight helps us make sense of ourselves and of other people. Dan knew he had to use MindSight in this situation. In the core of our MindSight lies the essence of reflection, openness, observation, and objectivity. Dan likens these three to a tripod. They are the legs of a tripod, while the MindSight is the camera. Without the tripod, our MindSight would have a hard time capturing our feelings and thoughts. But with the tripod, the MindSight can be precise about all the things that go through our heads. We can understand better. Openness means that we don't restrict ourselves to a particular line of thinking. We release ourselves from expectations. We accept ideas and thoughts as the way they are instead of what we want them to be. This opens up a healthy atmosphere for difficult conversations. Observation is making sense of something as we experience it. It's taking a step back from the moment and making notes of how we act and behave during that time. In this way, we'll be able to see if there are problems with how we respond to situations. Objectivity reminds us that we shouldn't get carried away by our thoughts and feelings. They are temporary, and we shouldn't make one thought or feeling become our whole identity. Objectivity helps us develop judgment. This refers to how a thought or feeling is just something that happens in our minds. It's not reality. Therefore, we shouldn't just focus on our thoughts and feelings when we are going through a difficult situation. Reflection is needed for MindSight. It reminds us that we should be open and reflective instead of being closed off and reactive. Being reactive means that you let your emotions and feelings control your behavior. So before he talked with his son, Dan used his MindSight to reflect on his actions. He calmly looked back on the crepe situation and how it all went wrong. He didn't speak harshly about himself because reflection is all about compassion. We all make mistakes every once in a while. What's important is to learn from them and be better. As soon as they got back from roller skating, Dan went to his son's room and asked to talk with him. The son told his father how unfair the whole situation was. He also pointed out again how irrational Dan was. Although one might become defensive when someone points out our mistakes, observation is essential. Dan wanted to speak up for his behavior, but instead he listened to his son. He knew that the urge to defend himself was just his emotions trying to get a hold of him. Thus, Dan was able to maintain objectivity while his son told his side of the whole situation. His son further explained that he didn't even do anything wrong. Dan knew his son was right, but there was still an urge to lecture him about sharing. However, Dan practiced openness. He reflected on what his son's experience was. He wasn't listening just to have something to say. No, Dan listened because he wanted to know what his son truly thought and felt during that time. Minding the brain. Neuroplasticity in a nutshell. Through MindSight, we are changing how we react and behave in particular situations. This is especially needed when our reactions and behaviors negatively affect ourselves and other people. But would you believe that changing how you think can rewire your brain? Because it absolutely does. Our brains are amazing and powerful. It has billions of neurons inside it that receive information from the different parts of our body. Once the neurons receive this, they tell our brain and the other parts of our body what to do. A simple example would be your hand touching a hot kettle. Your neurons would be shouting at your brain and your hand that you should immediately stop touching it. If you didn't, you'd be in great pain and you'd suffer from severe burns. Of course, this is a really simplified explanation as to what happens when you touch a hot kettle. When neurons connect with other neurons, synaptic connections are formed. Neurons have to constantly keep in touch so that your brain and body are up to date with what's going on with you. Suppose you had a brain scanned while you were doing a task. Doctors would see that your neurons would be firing away as you did the task. It would be evident on the scan since neurons that are activated would light up on the screen. Neural firing is most observed in mental activities such as focusing and remembering something. But mental activities of any sort can provoke neural firing. Exercising is a perfect analogy of how MindSight can make changes to our brain. Exercise needs both balance and coordination. Different muscles are being used to keep the body in good shape. In a similar way, we can use MindSight to exercise our brain. We can reinforce certain synaptic connections and even link new neurons together through mental activities. For instance, using the tripod of MindSight, openness, objectivity, and observation, will feel weird at first. You might not even use it all the time. Just like exercise, you won't be able to be consistent right away. But eventually, you'll find yourself exercising at the start of every day. As you constantly practice MindSight, it will soon replace your old automated responses. Instead of shouting at your child for being messy, you take a few seconds to calm down. Then you're able to explain to your child why making a mess is wrong. When we experience something, neural firing happens. The firing will inevitably connect the neurons involved. The synaptic connection becomes even stronger by repeating an activity or focusing your attention. As you repeat your exercise, your muscles become more defined. As you focus on studying, your grades go up. As you introduce your body and mind to a new activity such as MindSight, it can form new synaptic connections. Because these connections in your brain weren't there before, your brain accommodates this. This is what neuroplasticity is all about. Your brain changes according to the connections the neurons in your brain make. MindSight can alter the structure of your brain for the better. Daniel Siegel emphasizes that it isn't just MindSight that you can gain. You're able to take advantage of your brain's neuroplasticity as well. Our brain's ability to adapt to new behaviors, feelings, and actions reinforce the idea that there's hope and even the worst people can change. A roller coaster mind. Strengthening the hub of awareness. Now that you know that your way of thinking can change your brain, you should know how to take advantage of this. That's how Dan helped 16-year-old Jonathan. Jonathan went to Dan because he and his parents were concerned about his mental state. His moods would often be dark and his rage was uncontainable. Jonathan would burst out in anger over the littlest of things and often thought about suicide. Dan strongly suspected that Jonathan had bipolar disorder. It was common in adolescence. Since it is important to properly diagnose a person so that clinicians can treat them properly, Dan asked for opinions. He asked 2 of his colleagues with regards to Jonathan's diagnosis. All 3 of them agreed that Jonathan had bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder makes it hard for the person to achieve a sense of balance in their life. A sense of imbalance is present because bipolar people often experience two states, manic and depressive. The manic state is often when the person experiences getting high on life. They are happy, impulsive, and can become very confident. After experiencing a manic state, they usually go through a depressive state. It would be characterized by negative moods and often suicidal thoughts. Switching from these states can be disorienting and unsettling. Although a lot of people diagnosed with bipolar disorder are treated through medication, Dan wanted to take a different approach. With consent given from both Jonathan and his parents, he would first go through a treatment called mindfulness. Because of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, going through a non-medicated treatment first would be ideal. If it was ineffective, they would go with medication. Mindfulness is being aware of one's own well-being or state. Its activities can tap into your MindSight. It can help the person stay in the present moment, which Dan thought would be good for Jonathan. As bipolar disorder can shift the person from manic to depressive, it would be a good way for him to ground himself. This means that mindfulness will help him not get overwhelmed with the emotions that he feels. As you focus on a mindfulness activity, your neurons start firing up. They eventually reshape the paths in your brain as you do the mindfulness activity often. Think of making a path in a field of grass because you keep walking there. That's what more or less happens in your brain. Mindfulness, aside from helping one become self-aware, is a stance you take for yourself. It helps you create a non-judgmental and non-reactive atmosphere where you can process everything that's happening to you. It's about being your own best friend. Before they dived into mindfulness practices, Dan had to make sure that Jonathan was in an ideal state for neuroplasticity. First, he had to exercise regularly, since exercise is a treatment itself. It releases endorphins that fight dark moods. Second, Jonathan should have a balanced diet. Lastly, he should get enough sleep. Jonathan was willing to do this since he was also scared of his own outbursts and thoughts. The mindfulness activity Dan introduced to Jonathan was called MindSight meditation. It focused on one's breath. First, you get yourself into a comfortable position. Then slowly focus your attention on the different parts of the room. You can put your attention to the farthest place in the room, or you can put it right in front of your face. Second, imagine your attention going inside you. As you put attention on yourself, proceed with locating your awareness. Awareness is your breath. Focus on how you breathe inward through your nose, then exhale through your mouth. As you keep doing this, you might find yourself get distracted by your thoughts, feelings, or worries. When you notice yourself getting distracted, slowly put your awareness back to your breath. Feel how you breathe in and breathe out. Now, while still breathing in and out, imagine your mind as an ocean. The ocean's surface might be stormy or has big waves, but deep down below, the ocean is peaceful and calm. Imagine being deep down in the ocean and looking up towards the surface of your mind. Now you will see the waves above as a representation of your feelings, emotions, and thoughts. As you enjoy the peace and quiet that comes with being deep down below, tell yourself that it's possible to feel and think of all the things going inside your mind without getting overwhelmed. You are more than your thoughts and your feelings. You can separate yourself from them. They are experiences and they should not define you. Jonathan did this mindfulness activity daily. He also wrote about it in a journal to keep track of how he felt during his meditation. After a couple of weeks of exercising, eating right, sleeping early, and meditating, Jonathan felt changes. As he felt waves of anger threatening to drown him, Jonathan used the MindSight meditation to calm himself. He would see his anger on the surface of the ocean, and he was looking up at it, safe and calm deep below. Dan and Jonathan continued to meet for therapy for 1 whole year. He was a completely different person by then. Jonathan looked happy and relaxed. Conclusion. You learned about MindSight and how it can help you become aware of your own thoughts and behaviors. It is a self-reflective approach that aims to help you improve yourself in a non-judgmental and kind way. You learned about how the absence of MindSight can make us lose control. This can be harmful to the people around us as well as to ourselves. Failing to take a look at our behaviors and feelings will damage our well-being. It can ruin how we think, and it can also ruin our relationships with other people. You learned that taking the time to reflect is at the heart of MindSight. Reflection has 3 factors: openness, observation, and objectivity. You learned about neuroplasticity. This is a vital factor for MindSight, since how you think can change the structure of your brain. What this means is that it's not too late to change old, destructive ways to respond and behave. Lastly, you learned about a mindfulness practice called insight meditation. It helps you become aware of the option that you can refuse to get carried away by your thoughts and feelings. The best thing we can do is to grow through our mistakes and failures. Let's learn from our destructive behaviors and make it a point to be better. It's what we deserve and need. And with that, we come to the end of the summary of MindSight. Are you ready to become a better version of yourself? Are you prepared to be more kind and compassionate towards yourself? Let us know in the comments below. This is Mohita, signing off for now. Hope to meet you again in another summary. I hope you have a great day ahead.